Chris Murphy took a long shot and won, sending longtime Congresswoman Nancy Johnson packing her bags. Now Murphy, who has only been in office for 5 months, is already seeing what it's like to be on the other side. And joining me now is Republican State Senator David Cappiello from Danbury, who wants Murphy's job and recently announced that he is indeed throwing his hat into the 5th congressional race. Senator Cappiello, thanks very much for being here this morning with us on Beyond the Headlines. I guess my first question is this: we're just catching our breath from November. It was quite an election. History, as I said, was definitely made. I saw you at a lot of the Nancy Johnson events, and no doubt you also worked with Chris Murphy in the state Senate. What is it now, with just 5 months with his job in Washington, that made you decide, okay, I need to get into this race and challenge him on his job?
Well, there were a few things. First, for a candidate to really be competitive in a congressional race these days, they have to start early because Chris has already raised $400,000, most of which comes from special interest groups in Washington. So to be competitive, a candidate has to raise money, and they have to do that early. But more than that, already in the last 3 or 4 months in Washington, Chris has voted to raise taxes, the largest tax increase in Connecticut's history, costing on average $4,300 for every household in Connecticut. And he also voted for a spending bill for the war package that would stuff $21 billion in pork into that war package. Whether someone's for or against the war, I don't believe we should be mixing funding for soldiers with billions of dollars in pork.
Well, I can't necessarily comment on that, but one thing Chris Murphy did talk about is he does believe that there should be some type of timetable for troop withdrawal in Iraq. And he was actually on our show a few weeks ago, and he had talked to President Bush and Vice President Dick Cheney about his trip to Iraq. And let's take a listen to what he had to say about what he said to President Bush.
Most of us told him the danger that our armed forces are in over there. We told him the fact that we don't think this escalation can last. And I'll tell you, I hope he heard us, but he seemed fairly unreformed. He spent as much time pushing back on us.
What do you think of President Bush and the way he's handled the war in Iraq? Do you think that he has been not flexible, that he has not been willing to listen to the other side?
I may be in disagreement with most Republicans on this issue. Understand that I believed what President Bush said when he was running for president the first time, that we are not nation builders. And I think we've gotten into this war for the wrong reasons. And I think the war has been handled horribly ever since we've been in the war. So I am kind of on the outs with my party on this issue. But I think it was a mistake from day one, and I think the president's wrong.
And you have Lebanese-American roots in you, correct? Your father was from Lebanon, or your grandfather?
My father's Italian, my mother is Lebanese.
Okay, that's right.
Yes.
What do you think the war in Iraq has done then from that perspective in the Middle East? Do you have family over there? What are they thinking?
Well, I have family, a distant family in Lebanon, but not in Iraq.
Right, that's, I meant to say Lebanon,
yes.
Forgive me for that.
But I think that the entire Middle East now is in a shambles. I think there was a reason why the first President Bush chose not to completely decimate Iraq when he was there in the early 90s, because there needed to be a balance between Iran and Iraq. And there was a reason for that. He knew what he was doing, they knew what they were doing, and I think this President Bush made a big mistake.
But of course, hindsight is always 20/20. What would you do as a freshman congressman in Washington?
Right now?
Yeah.
I would vote to have the troops come home, but I wouldn't do it by putting billions of dollars of pork into that bill.
But when you say pork, what do you mean by pork?
There was $21 billion of pork, domestic pork, in the war funding bill to buy off votes, mostly in the Midwest and down south, for spinach farmers, for peanut farmers. That had nothing to do with the war funding bill for the soldiers. That is wrong. I think people are tired of us mixing and matching either in Hartford or in Washington our funds. They know that pork doesn't belong in that bill. If we're going to spend money on various domestic projects, there should be hearings on them, and there should be a process, not just shoved into another bill. That's what people are tired of in Washington, D.C. The same old, and this is going on already. I was disgusted when the Republicans were doing it when they had control, and just as disgusted right now with the Democrats doing it.
We tried to get Congressman Murphy to give us a response to your throwing your hat in the ring. He did not get back to us. However, he did tell a local newspaper that his spokeswoman said that Congressman Murphy was concentrating on doing his job in Washington and trying to change the way things were done in Washington. So, of course, I would have loved to have his response to what you're saying here, but I don't have it. Anything else that you think sets you apart from Congressman Murphy? I mean, do you think now that Nancy Johnson's out, obviously she was a member of your own party, this is your chance?
Well, obviously
You're
it's an
young,
opportunity.
Chris Murphy's young. Do you feel like you're on the same
Well,
playing field there?
unfortunately, I used to be able to run in my youth and my energy. Now I have to run on my age and experience because I'm the old man in the race. But I think one
38,
thing,
correct? You're
38
that's
years
hardly old.
Well, in this race, a little bit older than Chris.
Right.
But I think one thing I have going for me is my voting record in Hartford is very independent. I've been outspoken against my own governor at times, even though she's very popular and I love her, but I disagree with her on a number of issues. I disagree with our prior governor on a number of major issues, and my own Senate Republican leadership on a number of issues that are significant in the state of Connecticut. And I think that's what sets us apart. I don't just vote the party line because I'm told to.
Speaking of the governor, you brought her up, so I'm going to go there. There has been some new developments concerning her chief of staff, and that she was the one who handed over a list of contributors in the arts field. What do you think about that? Do you think Lisa Moody yet again made another mistake?
I think it was a big mistake, unfortunately. I'm hoping that it will be rectified, but I think that she made a big mistake. And I think the worst thing someone can do when they make a mistake is not to be forthright about it to begin with, because we're all human, we all make mistakes, but let's be honest about it right up front.
And explain that in your own words, what exactly happened. There was some questions over how a list of names were given to the governor's campaign, correct?
Correct. Some employees in the governor's office decided to request lists for fundraising purposes and then give it to the campaign. And those two offices should be completely separate. Whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, that shouldn't be going on on state time.
Okay. All right, Senator. Well, good luck to you. And I understand some other folks will be throwing their hat into the ring as well, running against Congressman Murphy, but you were the first one, at least on the Republican side, to do that. And we'll have you back on here when election time creeps closer.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much, Senator.